Hello, I'm Andrew Pritchard, and thank you for watching today's South Regional Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Eric Snodgrass is making his way back from Canada early this morning, has a 6 o'clock flight to catch, so I'll be filling in for him. He'll be back with you here on Tuesday. As we look at the last 72 hours of precipitation across the entire lower 48, we saw a couple things. First, Barry's remnants continue to make their way up the lower Mississippi Valley, going through parts of the Mid-South and then eventually curving off to the east across parts of the eastern Corn Belt. Precipitation became a little less heavy than what we saw here across the southern region as it made its way northward, becoming more isolated to scattered thunderstorm activity. We've also continued to watch this corridor be very active with thunderstorm activity over the last 24 to 48 hours, really going back the last week or two, and that'll continue to be the case for the next couple of days before we eventually watch a frontal boundary bring in some change and take thunderstorm activity from north to south, from the upper Midwest into parts of the southeast region as we get to the end of the weekend. Looking at the hazards map from the National Weather Service, we're watching a big area of the central United States all the way into parts of the eastern United States dealing with excessive heat warnings. That's the pink shading you see there. And we're talking about high temperatures in the mid-90s with dew points in the mid to upper 70s, creating very hot and muggy conditions, heat indices from 100 to 115 across the region here today and tomorrow, and then even to parts of the back half of the weekend in parts of the Ohio River Valley. We'll eventually watch this air mass be kind of cleaned off or pushed off to the south as we head through the weekend into early next week. That's because we're going to look for a shift in the jet stream. As we start off here on Friday, we've got broad ridging across the central and eastern United States, keeping things very hot and muggy. But as we go through the next few days, we'll watch for this ridge to kind of shift off to the west, allowing heat to build over the western United States, but bringing some cooler air into the Midwest and into parts of the southern region as we head through the next 48 to 72 hours. Temperature forecast, just kind of a snapshot view here of the next 5 to 10 days. The first 5 days here over on the left, and you're seeing a mix here between the very hot air mass that we've got in place now and the cooler air mass that follows. So you're seeing closer to neutral temperatures here across the central U.S., just because we're kind of capturing both of those. But as we look at the 5 days that follow here, the last 5 days or so of July, you see that cooler air mass really taking hold over the eastern 2/3 of the United States. So we look at the temperature or the precipitation forecast here, week 1 on the left, week 2 on the right. Now I've got low confidence here over here, and I think this is a little bit wrong because I don't think it's quite picking up on the thunderstorm activity that we're going to see here over the back half of the weekend into early next week across the southern region. I don't think we'll be drier than average here across this region. I think actually closer to average, if not a little bit wetter, especially along coastal areas here as we get into early next week. The tropics are quiet, at least for the next few days here. The latest outlook here from the National Hurricane Center, no activity expected over the next 48 hours. So we'll go ahead and we'll jump straight into the high-resolution NAM model here and just look at the precipitation forecast as we go through the next couple of days, taking us into Sunday afternoon. As we talk about the southern region, really just watching for afternoon pop-up thunderstorm activity across this region here as we deal with the hot and humid conditions. We watch for those thunderstorms to kind of pop each afternoon and evening. But then really watching for organized thunderstorm activity over the next 48 hours in this general region. But as this front makes its way south here Sunday and Monday, we'll eventually watch the precipitation activity sink south with it. So playing it one more time and just stepping through time, I'll take my last drawing off there as we go through the day Friday. Getting into Friday afternoon and evening, watching for thunderstorm activity developing from parts of Florida into Georgia and Alabama across the southeast. And then as we see the same thing happen here as we get into the day on Saturday, getting into Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening. Again, just watching for pop-up thunderstorms across the southeast here with more organized thunderstorm activity accompanying this frontal boundary that's sagging south through the region. See the same thing as we had through Sunday night and then eventually into Sunday afternoon. And we'll watch for more organized thunderstorm activity now along this frontal boundary from the Central Plains into the Ohio River Valley with pop-up thunderstorms during the afternoon and evening across the Gulf Coast states. The accumulated forecast or accumulated precipitation forecast that accompanies that, again, as it plays, we'll do it one more time. You can just watch this activity, the more organized activity, slowly moving south with time, but keeping those pop-up thunderstorms in the forecast here across the southeast region, at least across Florida, Georgia, Alabama, where it looks to be most plentiful over the next 3 days or so. The temperature forecast, we'll go ahead and just play this out as we head through again Friday, Saturday, and the first half of Sunday, and you're watching this frontal boundary each day. You see the heat build, but it sinks a little bit further south each and every day as that front slowly makes its way south across the region. Now, looking longer term at the European model here, looking at the jet stream, this is where we can watch this transition happen over the next few days. Starting off on Friday, broad ridging across the eastern two-thirds of the country. That's what's kept it very hot and humid across the region. We'll go ahead and we'll play this out, though, and we'll see this change happen. Let me go ahead and get the scroller up here. There we go. So jumping back to Friday, going through the weekend now into Sunday and Monday. By the time we get to Tuesday, a big change has happened. Now we've got, troughing over the eastern two-thirds with western over ridging over the western United States. That again allows heat to build in this region. Going to bring a cooler and drier air mass into the eastern two-thirds of the country. As we play this out, though, getting into next week, it's not as if this really settles in for a long-term cold snap across the eastern and the central part of the country. As we head into late next week, kind of flipping back to a flatter pattern with little disturbances traveling along that. And that'll keep opportunities for cooler bursts here to follow, 1 or 2 day cool downs, but then returns to a more typical hot summer weather pattern with opportunities for these little troughs to bring showers and storms to parts of primarily the Corn Belt, but perhaps getting into parts of the Mid-South and parts of the southern U.S., but kind of flipping back to a more typical summer pattern where we're not dealing with any extremes as we get into the end of next week. We'll look at the precipitation forecast here from the European model, and this will start to pick up on some of the thunderstorm activity late this weekend into early next week for parts of the southern region. We'll go ahead and we'll step through time with this one as well. Starting off on Friday, now the first few days you're watching for thunderstorm activity most plentiful in this area as our front slowly makes its way south. That'll show up pretty well here in this loop, but watching for daily thunderstorm activity, pop-up storms across parts of the southern southeast. So we're going through Saturday now, getting into Saturday evening. We're watching this frontal boundary kind of settle into this region. We'll go through the day on Sunday. Now we're watching for more widespread thunderstorms from the central plains into the eastern Corn Belt, but still seeing pop-up thunderstorms across this region Sunday afternoon and evening. As we go into the day on Monday now, this front making its way further south into parts of the southern region by the time we get to Monday evening and Monday night. And then on Tuesday, the front settling into the Gulf Coast now, watching for thunderstorm activity along that. An area of high pressure off to the east, and that allows Gulf moisture to continue to pump up and ride up and over the top of this frontal boundary. So widespread thunderstorms going to be in the forecast here, certainly late Monday, but then getting into the day on Tuesday. And then as this frontal boundary kind of stalls out in this region, watching for the same thing, moisture pumping up and over the top of that, wherever this boundary settles in. We'll continue to see daily thunderstorm threats along that, especially, closer to the Gulf Coast region it looks right now, Thursday, and then continuing into the late part of the weekend. Still seeing the Gulf moisture feed in up and over the top of that frontal boundary as it kind of lingers across the region. So by the time we get to Monday, and then especially Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, watching for the repeated development of thunderstorms across this region, which is why I think that the dry anomalies being picked up by the GFS ensemble model may be a little bit erroneous across the especially coastal regions of the southern region. The total precipitation forecast from the European model, again, you're going to watch things kind of just slowly settle off to the south as this loop plays. And here we go now, Friday through the weekend and into early next week, watching for, again, as that frontal boundary perhaps stalls out across coastal regions here, watching for, you can see it just stacking up each day there, allowing for the accumulation of perhaps 1 to 3 inches in some areas locally higher, where we see some of these thunderstorms slower moving with some downpours possible across the region. The temperature forecast here, this is where we can kind of watch the transition here with the hot, humid air mass over the central and the eastern U.S. right now with cooler temperatures across the western U.S. And then as we shift the jet stream, you watch the heat build here with cooler air sinking in from the north across the central and the eastern U.S. So here we go. We'll just begin to play this, and it'll also show you what happens here when we get to the end of next week. So we're getting into now Sunday and then Monday. It's Monday and Tuesday that you'll feel some relief here in the southern region, bringing in a cooler and drier air mass. Of course, along coastal regions, probably not seeing a lot of relief from the humidity as we keep the frontal boundary maybe stalled out there and bringing Gulf moisture in over the top of that. But then as we head into the early part of next week, or the late part of next week, I should say, again, flipping to a flatter pattern with disturbances traveling along that, and that's going to bring brief warm-ups to the area, perhaps brief cool-downs on the backside of some of these storm systems, but really keeping things closer to average, not really that extreme one way or another by the time we get to late next week into early next weekend, back to a more typical summer pattern. Another way of visualizing this, one more way of visualizing it, we'll look at precipitable water. This is a way of taking a look at the moisture content within the atmosphere, and that's where we see this very humid air mass over the eastern 2/3 of the country. As we begin to play this loop, though, you'll see the pattern change, drier air sinking in from the south. We'll go ahead and we'll get this loop started here. There you see that drier air mass making its way in from the north. But as we get to the end of next week, so here comes the drier air mass punching in now from the north. As we take this out into the middle part now, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, starting to see this humid air mass kind of creep back in from the south, again returning us to a more typical late July, early August pattern as we get into the end of next week. We'll finish now looking at the high temperature forecasts for the next 5 or 6 days. We'll go ahead and we'll stop this loop so we can click through time here with the day on Friday. Again, heat and humidity, the big story across the eastern 2/3 of the country. Each day you'll watch that frontal boundary kind of sink a little bit further south. So here we get into the day Saturday, seeing the core of the heat across this region. Sunday, your high temperatures here in the south still hovering right around 90 degrees, a very humid air mass down here as well. Now getting into the day on Monday, seeing that relief arrive in the form of that cold front. Tuesday, cooling off a little bit further, even with high temperatures in the mid to upper 80s across the south region. As always, Eric Snodgrass will have an in-depth look at the evolution of the next 1 to 2 weeks in our Monday morning ag forecast video. And Eric will be back with you with the southern region update midday on Tuesday. Have a great day and a wonderful weekend.